Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive! This week's discussion is part 3 of my series on Mage the Ascension, the Ascension War, and the key warring philosophies involved in it. I will be focusing this week on the Council of Nine Traditions, the supposed good guys of the Ascension War. Of course, as anyone who's a really big fan of White Wolf knows, not every side is all cut and dried. They all do those things that probably they shouldn't. I will probably touch on that a little bit in this. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we begin talking about the Council of Nine Traditions this week. Last week I mentioned the fall of the Mistred Chantry. This was the inciting incident of the Ascension War. This was the point where the Council of Traditions, what would become the Council of Traditions, had to go, we cannot accept or tolerate what this Order of Reason is doing. We have to take action. And this was a big deal. This wasn't just a defining moment in a philosophical war. This was a moment where lines were drawn. You had the Order of Reason pushing their own methodology, their own approach to everything. And then you had all these mystical traditions who never worked together. In fact, many of them outright hated each other. You had the Christian theurgists of what would become the Celestial Chorus. They didn't like the more pagan-oriented Verbena or the shamanic dream speakers. Heck, they didn't even like the Muslim mystics who were going to be put into their group. And that sort of issue was going to be happening all throughout the council. It basically took one majorly powerful, majorly charismatic mage, a Verbena in this case, to focus them, to get them to realize they had to put their differences aside and work together. Of course, they still never really quite got over their rivalries. But that's neither here nor there. Ultimately, what happened was you had this disparate group of powerful, strong-willed people able to reweave reality to their whim, pulled together and forced to work together. Egos flared, and, there were growing pains. The first cabal of wizards, the first cross-tradition group of mages, was actually betrayed by one of its own members to the Order of Reason. The representative of the Sulficati tradition, the alchemists, actually felt sympathy for what the Order of Reason was doing, and so sold out the first cabal. But this was because, ultimately, the Order of Reason was right at this time. Mages were not good people. They did bad things. They set themselves up as laws unto themselves and would do whatever they chose to do, regardless of what anyone said. And this led to the formation of the Order of Reason, this was also something that had to be dealt with. Because in a war like the Ascension War, you're not fighting for resources. You're not fighting for land or territory. You're fighting for the belief of people that your belief is valid. And that was the problem the traditions ran into. Technocracy had slowly been building things up, slowly convincing people their way worked. And the traditions weren't able to do that. So they had to find themselves dealing with a world where you couldn't throw a fireball down Main Street anymore. Now, if you set a wagon on fire and rolled it into barrels of gunpowder, that could work. And so that was what they had to deal with. They had to learn to do magic in a way that they were doing magic, that they could understand, but that the average mortal observer did not know that it was magic. That they believed that there was some rational explanation. And that became called coincidental magic. What we normally think of as magic, throwing the fireball down Main Street, that became called vulgar magic. And this is the state that the magical world found itself in. Now, there are groups outside the traditions that don't really care about this differentiation between vulgar and coincidental magic. But they're for another time. They're actually one of my favorite groups among what they were called the crafts. But like I said, that's for another time. What ended up happening, though, is with this having to rely on mortals, the tradition slowly began to change philosophically. They actually started to reach a point where they were looking out for the mortals in many cases. Admittedly, there will always be those who are, no, we're fighting a war. We need to do stuff to shock people, to force our belief through. There are always those groups. And I dare say that they are the reason why the traditions always kept losing to the Technocracy in the overall scheme of things. Now, from there, we get to the point where you have the difference engineers join. They become the virtual adepts. Before them, though, you had the Electrodyne engineers, where they actually fell victim to the Technocracy's own system. Because they believed in this thing called luminiferous ether. It was in everything. It was what they used to calculate all their magic. And the Technocracy decided luminiferous ether did not meet their vision of reality. And so, the Electrodyne engineers defected to the traditions and took the unoccupied seat of matter. The seat of matter was originally held by the Sulficati, who were driven out of the traditions after the events of the First Cabal. And the traditions finally had something going for them. They had someone who understood this techno-magic that the Technocracy was using. So they could finally start understanding how it worked. But they also had this group come in with the actual belief in protecting humanity. For the most part. When you're dealing with Victorian mad scientists, sometimes things go a little wonky. But, for the most part, the Electrodyne engineers, aka Sons of Ether, as they became known in the traditions, were good people. But with them came this knowledge. And with this knowledge, the traditions were able to start doing something that they had not been able to do before. And that was go after the Technocracy using its own methods. Nikola Tesla, while he wasn't necessarily a son of Ether, very much embraced a philosophy similar to what you would find coming out of the Sons of Ether. Using technology for good. Doing crazy stuff with electricity through the air. Okay? That's Son of Ether type stuff. It never worked when witnesses were around. That's a case of, the Technocracy not wanting his revolutionary ideas to work. Now, years later, we start seeing a lot of Tesla stuff starting to come into reality. Because now the Technocracy believes humanity is ready for it. And that's how this Ascension War works. One side tries to open up the possibilities for what humanity will accept. That is what the Council of Nine Traditions does. They focus on this idea of expanding human potential. Expanding what humans believe is possible. And as they slowly work things in, they slowly work out philosophies that explain things. And this gets people believing more stuff is possible. The Technocracy, on the other hand, tries to narrow what humanity believes is possible. Force it into a rigid timeline of when they let humanity believe things. And this is ultimately the war being fought. The ideology of, can humans dream? Can humans aspire to more? The traditions have changed from the very beginning. From when they aspire to basically keep mortals in line. Keep these upstart Order of Reason back to where they belong. To where they are now. Where they are fighting an ideological crusade of human potential. Of human will. Of human imagination. While you deal with the Technocracy, on the other hand, who started off trying to liberate humanity, and have now come into this point where they are squashing what makes humanity great. Squashing that spark of inspiration into a rigid, calcified reality. That is the fun of Mage the Ascension. Because you're dealing with a ideological war that we can relate to. Because when you get down to it, it is very much the conflict we deal with day to day. You know, people in business trying to keep us in this same endless cycle, while we go out and we go to drum circles, or we go to art shows and things like that to get away from that cycle, that endless repeating cycle of news that repeats the same things, of business ethics that keep us in the same spots. And that really is what I've always loved about Mage. So, thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please click like or subscribe on the box below. And join me next week. Next week, I will be talking about the amazing engine system. So, until then, have fun, and remember, keep gaming.